VRtefacts is a virtual reality experience for museums that surprises visitors by the chance to touch, move, and examine rescaled 3D prints and 3D models of actual museum objects. It then deepens their engagement by inviting them to share a personal story inspired by the object and donate a video of their story to the museum. This addresses museum needs around object handling, collecting visitor interpretations of their collections, and offering novel digital experiences. This was a Research Through Design pilot project created by Spence and Darzentas with help from Cameron that was led by theories and practices of performance familiar to Spence and Cameron. Our design aim was to use passive haptics in virtual reality to stimulate personal storytelling for donation to the museum. This is a completed VRtefacts story in the pilot version.
I used to make model airplanes when I was a kid, and I used to have lots of model airplanes. And my mum taught me to build model airplanes. She'd been taught by her brother, who actually flew planes in the RAF. And I had lots of airplanes hanging from the bedroom ceiling.
The bottom left shows Ian holding a scaled-down 3D print of a historic aircraft engine, which is tracked in real time so that he sees the accurate VR visuals, as seen here at the bottom right, whenever he moves the physical object. The top right shows the view of the virtual camera, showing the tracked model plus a representation of his headset. The top left shows a rather imperfect version of a composite of the real and virtual cameras at the bottom left and bottom right.
Substitutional reality enhances virtual experiences by using techniques such as passive haptics to integrate parts of the physical environment with the virtual worlds that users are experiencing. While we transported our users to a virtual hall that was vastly different than the physical room that they were actually in, we matched parts of the physical and virtual spaces that they could reach out and touch, such as the chair that they sat in and the table that they were facing. We applied passive haptics to the exhibits that our users could interact with. We used 6 3D scans of objects from the collections of the hosting museum and 3D printed 3 of them, while we used an empty vitrine to stand in as any of the other 3. All 4 of the props were made trackable with Vive trackers and matched one-to-one with the 3D models from the scans. The participants were invited to sit at a table and face the camera with a green screen behind them. Then they were fitted with a VR headset by a host who guided them throughout. On entering the virtual gallery, the first thing they saw was the matching table and camera, but also the 6 objects displayed around the hall on pedestals. The participants were then asked by the host to choose one of the objects that they would like to take a closer look at, and it would then materialize on the table in front of them, while unbeknownst to them, the host placed the physical prop on the desk in front of them for them to pick up. As the props were tracked and overlaid in the virtual space by the matching 3D models, the participants could manipulate them and the virtual model would match their movements, thus creating the impression that they were handling the real object rather than a 3D printed prop. The participants were able to reach out and interact with the chosen object before being asked to donate a personal story inspired by that object to the waiting camera. They were asked to do this twice, one with a 3D print and one with a vitrine which could be made to display any of the 3D models within it.
VRtefacts is a lot more than getting people to poke 3D models in VR, but we didn't just use 3D models to get people to tell stories. Instead, we deliberately designed individual mechanisms involved in storytelling to create a balance of comfort, because we didn't want to make our participants miserable, with a sense of recording something important for a public institution. It all depended on the intervention of a researcher playing the role of the host. In the next slide, you'll see our main host setting a range of expectations for the participant. The interactions got more complex later on, depending on what each participant needed.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, that's fun.
So you'll now find yourself in the donation hall. This is where the museum curators look after the items that they most want to hear your thoughts about. As you can see, there's only a few items here, and that's because the most important thing in this room is going to be you. and your thoughts and feelings about each of the items that you can see. So in a second I'm going to ask you to tell us a story about one of these items. And a story can be anything. It can be a personal memory, a wish, something it reminds you of, something it makes you think or feel.
Yeah.
We used this framework from the storytelling literature as a map of the elements we could adjust to make a story more conversational, to the left, or more like a performed story that you would pay money to go see, to the right. We wanted our participants to feel comfortable enough to tell a personal story, that's the left side, but to give it some real thought, that's the right side. This is what guided the host script and the design of the VR interior.
VRtefacts was conducted over 2 days, in which 24 visitors, museum volunteers and lab volunteers took part. Each visitor engaged with 2 VRtefacts, a 3D model and the empty vitrine, donated 2 stories, and took part in a short post-experience interview. Our findings show that there were 4 major factors which affected the storytelling. The manipulations of the physical objects, the visual elements, and the scale of the artifacts had varying impacts on the participation, but was overall overwhelmingly positive. The ability to physically and visually manipulate the objects proved to be incredibly important, and each played off of and enhanced the other, ultimately increasing the meaningfulness of the interaction. The manipulation of scale was more controversial, causing irreparable misalignment for some participants, although the majority either didn't notice or appreciated that some of the larger objects were more interactable in their smaller forms. Another factor was the storytelling, which proved to be the key contribution to participants emotionally and personally connecting with the objects and the museum, forging more effective, experiential and tangential connections with the objects than the participants believed they would have without VRtefacts. Our main findings, however, address the transitions affecting the canonical trajectory built into and experienced in VRtefacts. We present the transitions in 2 parts, the spatial transitions and the mental and emotional transitions. The spatial transitions were those that happened, by design, when participants were guided through the experience. We present this trajectory diagram to show how the movement between different physical and virtual spaces contributed to or disrupted the overall immersion and substitutional reality, from entering the art room where the experience took place, to entering the virtual donation hall, back to the art room and out into the wider museum. Exploring the spatial transitions shows that the coherence of the narrative between spaces, or rather the fact that both overtly represented museum settings, combined with the separateness and isolation of the virtual gallery, provided breathing room, which fostered creativity, engagement, and personal reflection. This second trajectory of the emotional and mental transitions through storytelling builds on the spatial transitions to show the internal trajectories experienced by the participant while they were in VR. Wilson's performance continuum described earlier allows us to understand how these transitions were experienced and reflected in the storytelling. We demonstrate the transitions as they happened from the first encounter with the object, through the exploration of the object in space, and throughout the storytelling. We show here how transitions can affect the emotional connections of participants and encourage different modes of engagement, for example by increasing formality, consciousness, intensity and risk prior to the storytelling, and then slowly decreasing them again afterwards. We found that whilst these transitions were rarely overtly commented on, they had a strong impact on the ability of participants to generate, share and improvise their stories.
Performative substitutional reality seeks to use any of the possibilities opened up by substitutional reality in order to engage users in personal storytelling and to leverage the sharing of personal experiences to heighten interactions with physical objects within VR. We conclude that performative substitutional reality offers an interesting approach to passive haptics, and that it can be understood well through an in-depth exploration of the manipulations and transitions afforded by it. A number of exciting possibilities for future iterations emerge from this study, such as exploring the different possibilities for scale, weights, textures and functionalities, or varying the role and manifestations of the host. These are just some starting points for realizing more of the potential of performative substitutional reality. And that is all. Thank you very much for watching our presentation, and we hope you find the paper enjoyable.